ABRC 2012. Unmesh, when we sort of conceptualized the ABRC 2012, even though we began as this as a first event, we looked at it as the annual deliberation and celebration. We said celebration of all the missionaries, advocates, and practitioners of business responsibility or business sustainability in Asia. That's how we said. We will, during the year, we may have some focus group meetings, some more workshops, etc., etc. But this should be an event where all the advocates, missionaries, and practitioners of sustainability actually come together to deliberate and celebrate each year. So that was the way we looked at it. Okay. So when we planned for ABRC 2012, the trigger was, of course, the Rio 2012 that concluded. And Rio called upon, Rio 2012 called upon all the businesses to contribute to sustainable development, and governments to encourage policy frameworks for the businesses to uptake sustainable reporting, sustainability reporting, and also governments to correct their GDPs, okay, including the damages that are done to the environment. These are some of the things that are relevant to our discussion. So we said, let us take up this Rio Plus 20, call to the businesses to contribute to sustainable development, and ask ourselves a question: how can business contribute to sustainable development? First of all, is it in its interest, or is it in its enlightened interest, or is it the government's responsibility unnecessarily being pushed on to the businesses? Second thing, we asked ourselves a question: if every business wants to contribute to sustainable development and start doing something or the other on its own, okay, will it actually help the cause of sustainable development, or it will harm the cause of sustainable development? Is it required that the government has to come up, or a partnership has to come up with an integrated plan for the sustainable development for each region, and a framework for each business to contribute to the sustainable development? So that one panelist said in that first session that we want a framework and a guide to action. Do this. This is the way that is real, that is measurable and reportable. I want to tell me. So is it that the businesses, by following GRI guidelines, or by following NVGs, or following United Nations Global Compact, this framework, if they follow, is that enough for them? And automatically, if all businesses do this, the sustainable development will happen. Businesses need not look beyond that. Continue to do their business and do this. So this question in the panel did not get answered. Did not get an answer. Even though we went here and there, etc., did not get the answer. What is your take on that?
Thanks, Dr. Rambabu. I think the content, the way it has been structured so far over the last 3 days has been interesting, because it has seen across all stakeholders what are the various viewpoints, what are the concerns, and what are the areas where successes can be defined and measured and, of course, enhanced in terms of their enduring value. I think the reason why we are unable to answer the question of whether only reporting is enough, or only doing something in your own company is enough, or you need to have much more collaborative effort is enough, is primarily because to a large extent sustainability or corporate social responsibility hasn't moved away from the charitable thinking syndrome. Today, if you look at even the debates raging in government policy and corporate circles on whether 2% of net profits should be contributed to charity, mark my words when I say that it is still a post-profit item. It's not something which is part of an expense or part of the operating process of a company to be able to ensure that you're working cleanly, ethically, in an environmentally fair manner, in a socially just manner with across your stakeholder groups. So as long as the society and environment are externality, you'll always feel confused whether we should report first or do impact first. And I think that is a thinking which many of us have over the years realized. The way in which the sustainability sector is moving today in terms of doing some pragmatic work on the ground is no different from how social sector and civil society organizations started sharing the burden of government many years ago, when perhaps during my formative years corporate social responsibility was something which I used to tell my colleagues and peer network what I was into, but nobody knew what was it. There were no plethora of courses, business schools never talked about it, students never opted for CSR as a career. All those things have changed in the last 20 years. So I'm not defeatist in terms of my views. I do see a lot of progress which has happened, but I think we are seeing this somewhere, what you touched upon is this futility syndrome, where there's so much happening, so much information overload, that for a real SME, a real practitioner, it's becoming difficult to figure out where do you start and where do you end. And I think what I would like to surmise, or what I would like to summarize in my comments on how the conference has gone so far, is you've made a beginning to touch upon the relevant points, because all these points over a period of time are going to be very important. It's not important just do one and not do the other. And the dichotomy is clearly still, I mean, years ago, in the civil society sector, and even today, somebody who works for society doesn't work for the environment and vice versa. We're seeing that kind of split creeping into the corporate social responsibility sector also. And I would say we all are to blame, because if you see the way even reporting is mandated today or audited today, if you are into climate change and energy efficiency, then you are immediately connected to sustainability as a word. But if you are into corporate social responsibility, that is interpreted as doing something for the poor, for the charity. These two are the same things. I've been trying to cry hoarse over the last so many years that don't unnecessarily split hairs, because you're not going to then be able to achieve the kind of collaboration you're looking at. I've seen during my interaction with CEOs and boards that the biggest question which CEOs have is, are you a sustainability minded person, or are you a philanthropically CSR minded person? I don't know what to do with that question. I honestly believe that there are two CSRs, which is corporate social responsibility and corporate sales responsibility, and both are the same, if you decide to do it in a combined way, instead of saying that two things are different. So I think that's the reason why people aren't able to practice. And I think you did a good job in terms of trying to see what did Rio Plus 20 talk about. It said we want to create a future which is such that it is just sustainable, and more appropriately looking at including all those communities around the world who have been persistently excluded. And I think when you think along those lines, as a corporation, you would be thinking of customers, not only customers, but people beyond customers. Today, as a corporation, with the exception of few companies, nobody goes out to the market and says that I will first try and see if as a customer you have the money to buy my product, only then I will sell to you. No way. We talked about products, we talked about brands, we talked about responsible marketing in some of the sessions. And today, and somebody asks a question, who should take the communication to the customer? And I've spent a lot of years of my life in advertising and marketing agencies, and I do believe it's the job of ad agencies as custodians of the brand on behalf of their clients to be able to market the right way, not create an image of wanting to have more and more of the same or different products, but trying to layer in a communication. How many ads have you seen which instead of saying terms and conditions apply, puts a star there and says that we are carbon neutral as a product? Nobody. So whose responsibility is it to educate the customer? It's our responsibility, because until we don't do that, customers are not going to go to a mall and say that give me a carbon neutral product. They want to know what we're talking about.
We are a carbon neutral event.
Absolutely. So that's a good one. So exactly. So those are the kind of things. So you actually had people at the counter stalling, saying that, oh, you're asking me this question, let me figure out, let me give the right answer. So that's good, because you're influencing behavioral change by asking a simple question. Did you drive? Did you fly? where you stay,
Yeah.
and you do calculate carbon footprint. So that's my thought process, that we are unnecessarily splintered. We need to look at creating a combination of people in the corporate social responsibility team inside corporations, in the sustainability team, integrating across your stakeholders inside the corporation as well as outside. I could do that a lot during my time when I headed sustainability for HSBC, during my time at Ogilvy, where I looked at how do you create brands which can not only walk the talk in terms of ethical positioning, but actually try and then communicate about it, because once you walk the talk, it's easy to communicate. Today we see lots of communication happening before walking the talk, and that's where the problem is.
Yeah. Unmesh, we also had one session yesterday, second day, the last one, which talked about building sustainable models. Okay, while talking about this building sustainable models, the one panelist was of the opinion that the moment I follow, have a good stakeholder engagement, that keep my eyes and ears open, keep listening, and keep communicating with, okay, my stakeholders, I will get very early signals of the developments that are happening. What is happening at the supplier side, what is happening at the customer side, etc., etc. And I'll be able to transform my business. There is another who said, that's like, I have a framework for sustainability practice. And then I have a framework for reporting that and being accountable for my practice to all my stakeholders. If I have that as a system in my organization, automatically I will pick up the signals, okay, that are developing in the environment, and I can keep transforming my business. That's what he said. But there was another, I'm not sure, there was another panelist who said, yes, that's correct, we also have the system. But much more than that, I need to go above and scan the environment.
Poverty in India. I would love to hear anybody who does that. But perhaps you need to bring the discussion onto the Monday morning meeting table, such that along with the stock market price of your shares, we also look at what's happening in terms of your environmental footprint, what's happening in terms of your supply chain. And I think the kind of example, Dr. Rambabu, which you gave of this person who was keen to look at the signals, these signals are very important. We know of beverage companies who did not catch those signals when pesticide poisoning became an issue. And I was on the other side in the communication space that time, trying to tell the beverage companies that please catch these signals. There is something called advocacy and lobbying groups. There is something called activist groups who have picked up this issue very strongly, and it's scientifically correct according to them to bring to your notice that you have a certain level of impurity in your water supply which you use in your bottling plants. But you know, that was a time when F&B companies, when beverage companies were not keen to listen, and you saw what then happened. It had a direct impact on sales, there was agitation, so on and so forth. So listening is important, and today corporations have gone an extra step. We have teams who sit in corporate communications, who monitor what happens on Facebook, on LinkedIn, when people start talking about their brands. But I think this is not to say that you have to be a continuous watchdog and take immediate action, but try to consolidate that feedback such a way that you could either improve the way you do business, or you could improve the way you sell your product or service, or perhaps you could use that learning to demonstrate within your company that perhaps we need to change our system, process and governance style because people aren't getting right message. So it's a question of how effectively you use the stakeholder listening skills. And before that, many people don't even know what is a stakeholder, because that's the biggest giant or elephant in the room which you can't see. And you're then saying, okay, what do I need to do about this? Because, you know, I know customers, I know suppliers, so all of them are stakeholders. So what do I do with them then? Do I invite them? Typical thing is, I know, when I used to get requests during my time as head of sustainability that let's throw a vendor party. So I'm involving my stakeholders by throwing a party, which is good. And many people would love that, and they would praise you for the rest of their lives. It has nothing to do with sustainability. But you have to take steps like, can I look at my supply chain, my vendors in such a way that I take part responsibility, if I'm a bank, of trying to finance their energy efficiency installations. at a preferential rate because they are my vendor. Could you look at those kind of things? So that's where, signaling happens. That's where if you're listening to stakeholders on the ground, you could create systems where you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can actually do what you're doing. Do your banking, but finance energy efficiency project. Do your banking, but go after chasing not-for-profit organizations whose accounts you can open in return for your management volunteering time with them. So those are the kind of things which makes companies built to last, because that's how you create enduring value.
Some of these guys, Ramesh, what they did is they see as a sustainable organization, you have to create a net value, right? It's not necessarily the financial value. When you add up all the values together, the value that you contribute to customers, the value that you give to suppliers, the environmental value, the social capital that you create, all the values when I add up, these guys, what they seem to have done is that they saw the signals. Okay, they were selling specific example. It was Mahindra who said that they are selling tractors. They said that my tractors will be taken up only when there is a farm prosperity. Then they went into creating farm prosperity. Okay, when they went into creating farm prosperity, they also said, oh God, farm guys seem to have constraint of water. Water needs to be conserved, otherwise farming cannot be possible. Widespread farming is not possible. Farm wealth creation is not possible. If the water needs to be conserved, we need to get into micro irrigation. Actually, they acquired a micro irrigation business. So the journey started by asking questions as to what are the needs that can be satisfied, what are the human needs that can be satisfied sustainably. Okay, not in a, if you're a fertilizer company, if you want to grow your business by manufacturing more and more fertilizers, and if your sales teams continuously ask farmers to consume more and more fertilizers, actually you're falling in a trap and creating a business which just cannot. So I'm talking about, is that kind of a business transformation is necessary as far as sustainable business models are concerned? Or look, I know I follow NVGs, I follow sustainability reporting, these are my indicators, this is what I report. How do you look at it?
Again, a very interesting question, Dr. Rambabu. See, you can continue to follow whichever guidelines and whichever reports, because those are well thought out. A lot of science and thinking has gone into preparing those indicators and reporting around it. But end of the day, don't we get a feeling that the more we move forward, the more we seem to be at the same place? All companies put together today perhaps maybe using power to elevation as an indicator, but you don't see power to elevation really happening in income inequality terms, those terms getting reduced over a period of time. That's not happening. Slums in Mumbai city, to give an example, continue to go on the rise. So I don't know, when we talk about trying to look at health, sanitation, hygiene, environment, where are we? So the point here is this, which is where what you were alluding to, and you gave the Mahindra example, that instead of marketing to create demand, as a transformational corporation, you need to include people such that you take care of their ability to buy. And I think that's a classic positioning which has to be put in place. And years ago, I remember my campaign with Castrol and British Petroleum when I was at Ogilvy and Mather. In fact, we were the only team, I was designated quite antithetically in a pro-consumer aggressive advertising company as head of corporate responsibility. So half of the company used to go and tell people buy, and I used to tell them, let's work with stakeholders who are important, and you need to go beyond customers and all those things. So we worked with Castrol to precisely do the same thing. Castrol gave us a marketing problem. That 50% of our sales are dipping in drought-prone areas, where tractors use Castrol CRB Plus as the highest selling brand or product. And we worked with farmers groups, not-for-profit agencies, government enterprises, as well as with Castrol marketing teams to create water harvesting models on the ground. And some of them were so cost effective, like for example, in the areas where you have the Indira Gandhi Canal in Rajasthan, tiny tributaries fail to have water because sand seeps into the canal and you have nothing. You have to find where is your canal because it's under a sand dune. And you can never resolve that problem because you can't control the way the sand moves in a desert. So the problem was the solution was a locally found solution, that you have to put tiny slabs over the entire distributory, and we did that. So Castrol was responsible for putting tiny slabs out of their marketing budget on distributory of a small canal, which led to the farms to do irrigation. So it's a it's a thought chain which resulted in farms getting water, and the brand recall was Castrol. We did a lot of work with Castrol in such a way that it almost got positioned as a water company. So people used to go to Castrol outlets saying that वो पानी की किताब चाहिए, वो पानी का गाना चाहिए. We want to hear more about how to conserve water. We did folk performances in the retail areas. We did everything which a business does. Marketing, promoting, but we try to look at it from the perspective of what is it that the consumer requires at this point of time when the consumer is in a dipping point in his or her life. And we saw the campaign draw so much accolades in terms of responsiveness of customer groups, in terms of brand recall. In fact, in a drought season, we had inventories at retail outlets getting knocked off. People didn't have, so it had to be restocked. And we saw that, in fact, one of the newspapers carried an article on us saying oil over troubled waters. That's where we saw transformation happening in terms of how, by marketing a product in an interesting way, using the entire thesis of creating value first before talking about it, we could change the way a business operates in areas where it needs to grow profits and also work with customers on an incremental basis. But these initiatives remain very tiny. You will have a few examples. It takes time to cultivate these initiatives. What I think you and me are talking is how to put this into the DNA of the company. How is it that companies can do it irrespective of, like when I left Ogilvy, when I am no longer looking at Castrol as my client, this initiative is no longer functioning. So today, is there a trend in the country that in drought-affected areas, lubricants are marketed by focusing on water? Answer is no. So that's where the problem is. We are victims of pilots. And we don't have the necessary piloting ability to scale it to the next level.
Yeah, when we came to discussing on business responsibility and community development models, there was definite voice against, one panelist raised a voice against how business-driven community development models, fail. That's because they already have an article, they already have a purpose, they already have designed what they have to give, and they go and give there, and the community refuses that. He talked about a steel industry trying to give them steel-based homes or whatever it is. Or so you rather than understanding what they required, business drives. So that is one criticism. But in the same panel, one interesting thing that came up is, one side people were saying it is the business's responsibility to see that it contributes to varieties of positive benefits to the community. It actually does that because it is drawing quite a lot from the community, so it has to give back to the community as an accountability, not as a charity. It's an issue of accountability, they have to do it. Another way of achieving social development seems to be that one panelist has pointed out, he is from Habitat International. He says that community service as an experience I want to sell. So for doing community service, I actually charge the guy because he's going to gain. One part of the gain that they are looking into is that various CEOs, CXOs come to build because they want to do physical exercise, they want to have a community participation experience, etc., etc. And also they have a experience of networking with the other CEOs. It benefits their business, etc. So this whole experience he wants to sell. On the other side, he also wants to pick up material, which is a waste material, construction material, and wants to put them into the house making. So he's becoming a waste processor. So he's actually building homes for the communities, poorer communities, but drawing two revenues streams, and it doesn't really require a business as a responsibility to come and do that particular work. Is it another kind of a model that you see?
Yeah, it's a very good model. In fact, I have participated in Habitat Builds, and they do add a lot of sense of doing the right thing because you're helping people move back into proper homes. Of course, we did that in the aftermath of tsunami, where we worked very closely with Habitat to get our employees go out there. This was during my time at HSBC, go and build houses. And it's a very interesting way to open the eyes of people to the world around them and tell them that perhaps there is a world which requires your attention as much as your corporate world requires your attention. So from that perspective, yes, selling, opening your eyes as a service is not a bad idea at all. And yes, you have the cradle to cradle approach nowadays, gathering attention in terms of people realizing that you have to not minimize waste, but perhaps, have no waste at all. So recycle as much as you could. And from that perspective, using such material in housing makes a lot of sense. But I think where I'm coming from is, and perhaps it's too naive for me to be idealistic at this stage, but why not? Because if you are not idealistic, you wouldn't achieve even what is practical. If you always say that I want to be practical, which means that you're not taking the necessary risk required to create change in the world around you. So from that perspective, if all CEOs and CXOs and employees today are building houses with Habitat, shouldn't be having a housing problem, right? So that's idealism. But for a change, and I would say this to my dear friend from Habitat, Joseph, that he's not here, but perhaps offline conversation, that we need to look at these kind of activities. That what is my impact target? Is it all right to have a target which is in a small perimeter and say that this is what I do and this is all I can afford to do? Or you need to, and which is where the discussion is coming to, how are you reporting impact? What is the Millennium Development Goal? How do you comply with that? I think that discussion also happening. The idea is to measure impact in relation to something. If you have only saved 3 tigers when 40 others have been killed, and it's part of your communication campaign, I don't think that's impact. And I think that's where we are going wrong as corporations in terms of trying to just measure impact in a very limited way. And yes, if you drive partnerships just because you have a vested interest in the community sees through it and takes their own decision. And I'll give an extreme example. The reason for microfinance failure was company operating at the bottom of pyramid markets, trying to push microfinance to such an extent because of various pressures from their investors or pressures on bottom line or trying to create incremental growth, that it just required one government notification to the poor farmers on the ground that henceforward you can stop paying loans. That's it. That the market collapsed. So if you're really creating value in the lives of customers on the ground through a socially relevant and mandated product like microfinance, perhaps the customer should have come back and said to you that, no, this helps us, we are going to pay back. But that wasn't happening because the customers were exposed to 4 or 5 kinds of lenders, and perhaps they had enough in terms of their exposure. It was becoming a subprime issue on the ground. We have had cases of automotive companies who were unable to pay their vendors, but their vendors bailed them out by giving them an extended credit line because they recognize the work of the company in social and environmental issues. So these are examples. We need to make these examples real, not mere case studies which appear as slide number 42 in a presentation done to MBA students whom we want to attract to our college or to our corporation or to our business. So the institutionalization aspect of it is something which is lacking. There are efforts happening from the government side. National voluntary guidelines are a good effort. So is GRI-based reporting. But like I said earlier, mere reporting is not enough. The indicators of the reporting itself, like Dr. Rambabu, you said, are a hugely important aspect to work on. I always look at human rights as the biggest indicator, which no corporation today is willing to even accept that perhaps they are in violation of human rights somewhere or the other. So that's where we need to lead to, and reporting will be an outcome then. You need not say that you have to report. If you work on all the indicators, you'll come to a situation where community mobilization, working with partnerships on the ground, creating value for customers and other stakeholders, all of this is the way you do business. And then somebody like one of my dear friends was telling me that you need not do philanthropy then. It's all right, because you are a philanthropically enabled, inclusive commercial organization. And I think that's where we need to go to.
This brings us back to our financing the bottom of the pyramid, right? In This brings us to the panel on financing the bottom of the pyramid or socially responsible investments. They're different, but we focused more on financing the bottom of the pyramid, right? And we discussed a number of challenges in financing the bottom of the pyramid, and you brought out this point of, microfinance and et cetera, et cetera. There again, we had this dichotomy of, scale up, and also, you have a model which is it works at small scale, but if you want to bring in money, it has to be at a larger scale, and you try to scale it up, and the model gets disturbed. Okay, and the investor or the financier not able to understand the total risks involved in it and complications, etc., and due to the things not happening. And some of the entrepreneurs even asking, that I want a smart investor. I want an investor who can turn my idealism into a reality and also give the money. So how do you look at, how will we be able to finance the bottom of the pyramid?
One thing is clear, that you cannot apply metrics of standardized investments to the bottom of pyramid markets. What does typically a bottom of pyramid market mean? These are people whose purchasing power parity has perhaps stayed more or less the same at $1 to $2 a day, net adjusted for inflation, of course. And there have been studies to show this, that you go to the poorest of the poor districts in the Bimaru states in India, and it's a challenge. Give people $2 and tell me how much can you survive per day. And the studies show that your first port of call in terms of cutting down your expense is food, proteins, milk, transportation, all of those things which you need to keep yourself in a healthy mind and body and to travel to earn your livelihood. So this being the case, when you look at such a bottom of pyramid market and you are then expecting a product to service that market and expecting people to let go of all their basic needs and buy your product just because you have a nice marketing bandwagon in place, it doesn't make sense for the investor to expect that you would buy, which they do today, and then to further expect that you will have returns which are incremental. So the issue is not of patient capital. In fact, most of VC and PE capital today is patient capital because people take 2 years to close a deal. So it's a very patient capital. There is no issue on that front. The issue is with patient returns. Are you willing to wait, like we waited for Castrol to provide water before even saying, and we did it in 6 months. Our wait was not such a long wait. First rains, water harvesting structures in place, water going to the farms, tractors running, lubricants being used, Castrol sales increasing, 6 months. So are we willing to look at creating value first for the customer before creating value for the investor? And I think that is the biggest point which today impact investing is trying to answer. There are many socially relevant funds. I'm not saying that they don't have this thinking on their radar, but the way funds are structured, that you need rigorous return on investment, you need a very healthy IRR, internal rate of return, you need exit. These are the systems and processes which are pretty much applicable to the commercial market. You need to adapt them a lot. That adaptation work is very sketchy as of now. Not many people are looking at this adaptation work. There is a filler technique which or a strategy which has come to fore in terms of venture philanthropy. So that's trying to look at how you help organizations to first create systems to scale before scaling up eventually. And I think therefore there is a need for CSR practitioners, venture philanthropy organizations who have the philanthropic capital in place to work very closely with the commercial capital guys. So everybody's interests are protected, hedged to a large extent, so that you don't have a case of people's expectations not being met. Because clearly the thinking of a private equity or a venture capital player is not going to change whatever we talk about the world at large being poor or not having access to resources. That's how they're structured. But what other players could you bring to the market which would provide risk mitigant? So venture philanthropy is a player which needs to work very closely with the private equity and venture capital market. Corporate social responsibility, grant funding, investing into communities to make them more appropriate to be able to accept products and services which are environmentally beneficial. That's the second way. So again, institutional mechanisms to bring about connectivity between various players is not happening, and it would perhaps be a amazing step forward for the Asia Business Responsibility Conclave to look at creating such forums that, how can we work together?
I see that there are a number of production services, poor pay the highest, higher than the middle classes, etc., etc. Generally, the energy services. Okay, there are a number of services that the poor, wherever the services the poor pay the highest. I think these are the services, at least you have a clear opportunity that the entrepreneurs to go there, the social ventures to go there and provide those services there. Of course, there the challenge is to manage risk. There are challenges to manage institutional issues, etc., etc. But quite a good number of places, especially energy, I see that. Energy, they pay the highest. Actually, the poorest of the countries pay the highest. I see some of the Southeast Asia's poorer countries, okay, pay up to something like 20 rupees per unit. And in India, some of the poorer people do pay that level of money. Okay, so there I think the social ventures can definitely play a role. Easily there is a way out.
Of course, yes, because working with the poor in terms of marketing products and services to them creates a volumes market, and your margins are in the volumes. But to try and milk that market for excessive volumes actually gives a poor pricing point to the customer on the ground. So from that perspective, like one of the panelists was saying yesterday, that our solar lamps are priced very high because we are quality conscious, such that they last the longest, because that gives value to people who are buying them. But to keep the pricing for the bottom of pyramid markets low, we have cut our own margin expectations. That's what Professor Mohammad Yunus also says. He has critiqued India's microfinance industry as not being pro-poor or pro-bottom of pyramid centric, because you never have a situation in a bottom of pyramid social venture entity where the promoters are laughing their way to the bank, but the poor are still at receiving end of credit because they have no other place to go. So you're not changing the scenario on the ground in terms of between moneylender and microfinance institutions. Is there a third option? Because there's no third option. There are only two options on the ground, and both seem to be equally exploitative. So when you work with poor, the pricing has to be such that the expectations of profits are tempered over a longer term, so that you remain sustainable as a company for a longer term. And I think that's the biggest learning I have had during my work with entrepreneurs and even venture capital as well as private equity funds.
Now, finally coming to the ABRC has become focused on NVGs and the SEBI's mandate. Now coming to these two. There are some panelists and many delegates also felt that it's a very brave move. Sometimes some people refer to as a coup that happened in Ministry of Corporate Affairs, that it came out with NVGs and SEBI came out with this particular mandate. Okay. So now that it is there, first of all, many said it's positive. Many said there are challenges in implementing them. The challenges are quite a lot. Okay, but how do you see going forward, especially the SEBI's mandate, this top 100 listed companies, okay, going forward in reporting? What kind of positive benefits will it bring? Number one, to the businesses, okay, and to the country as a whole. In the way I look at it is that businesses have to be sustainable because they have to generate net value. If the net value is generated, happiness increases. Okay, everybody is happy. So this SEBI mandate and NVGs, how do you look at? Are they part of our efforts towards going towards inclusive growth? Are they part of our turning our processes more transparent, more ethical, so that the investment from outside participation comes in? Okay, so that our growth story continues?
Yes, I would think so, Dr. Rambabu, because at the end of the day, if you look at the way the national voluntary guidelines are structured, it's the most effective document put in place. Yes, it was indeed a coup in terms of getting the government to accept it, because a lot of civil society players were involved in preparation of the document, and it in a single stroke tries to remove the complications around reporting. It tries to create simple covenants which asks companies to clearly create a system and a process to be able to define clearly where do they want to go in terms of their sustainability thinking and operations. Having said so, if SEBI has mandated it, it's with a purpose to try and create the ethical quotient of the entire capital market in India, because it's a tough proposition, but you have to start somewhere. I see this as a positive move because the guidelines aren't so draconian that they would force you to move away from your business and do something for which you have to spend a lot of time and effort, but it in a way instills inside the corporation the urgency to create a multidisciplinary team which looks at elements of these guidelines and tries to then bring them to the discussion table and tries to create working systems and processes around it. Uh, According to me, NVGs are also a good entry point for corporations to then try and understand, or even SEBI mandated funds to then try and understand the relevance of GRI based reporting or ISO 26000. It's good to create a process first before trying to create the report. And I think the NVGs help you create that process of looking deeply into where you can create your impact stories or your impact scenarios, and how you could gradually go towards measuring them, because what you can't measure you cannot see as beneficial, so you have to start that process. So I see this as a very good move, and I'm happy that ABRC is looking at reporting as one important element to continue deliberations on, and more importantly, through the national voluntary guidelines, its applicability to the MSME sector is also one very valid point, because I honestly believe that for large corporations, involving the MSMEs from whom they source their material is also a good corporate responsibility for which budgets should be allocated. So instead of driving down pricing just because vendor rates have to be competitive, you perhaps say that I don't mind paying you this price because you are an environmental friendly company, or you have documented proof instead of a mere check mark to show that you don't employ child labor in your operations. So this thinking would not come until you have some guidelines in place. But it's very difficult, like I said, to convince a CEO or the board of directors to speak on sustainability the way you and I and this audience is seeing it through this forum. They would completely veer your attention away towards charity and saying that how much check should be donated. So you get away from that, and that can only happen if the values around the national voluntary guidelines are imbibed into day-to-day functioning.
Also, I saw when during the deliberations, quite a good number of consultants and also the industry and business said that it is going to be, they are ready to deal with it, but there is a certain approach of it's a burden. Okay, too many reporting guidelines, too many aspects to take care of. And businesses are known to deal with a variety of things and complex situations and come out very innovatively and successfully. But here they seem to have a burden kind of an approach. So can't we turn this whole transformation, how do we turn this whole transformation as a delightful, as a approach to the business? Not a burden type of an approach, not a compliance, hence I have to report, or my customer is asking, hence I have to do. But this is a real business transformation and create value. And this was the original purpose of the business. Right. This was the original purpose of the business. I was straying away for some number of years or some number of decades, and I am actually correcting myself, coming onto the right path. It's a delight to do that. How do we transform this whole thing into a delight?
I think it's a question of changing your mind to think differently and pragmatically. I believe the greatest burden which any business has is sales target, not sustainability reporting. In fact, sustainability reporting would come many notches below because it's easier than converting your prospect into a sale. So I think there has to be a thinking within the management to try and look at, while they are doing their sales, can they improve their what do we mean by the fact that everything has to make business sense on the sustainability platform? So if you take sales as one of the parameters, could you improve your sales if you are a more ethical company? The answer is yes, so many surveys show you that. Could you put that into a process which allows you to define who amongst your teams should be responsible for driving an ethical quotient? You will have a lot of takers because there is innate talent available inside corporations. There is no need to invest more time and money and effort into hiring more people who tell you how to do things, but rather look at your own footprint, be it environmental, be it social, and try and look at how will it allow you to address your business problems more effectively if you are a sustainability enabled corporation, and that takes away the burden, because this is not a burden then. This is internalizing the entire value system of sustainability into your business operations. And I think that's where the thinking has to make a very dynamic shift.
Have anything else to say, Unmesh, on conclusion of the conference?
No, I was happy to see the issues which were covered, so I don't have much to say except the fact that I like the level of conversation, I like the interaction in terms of the astute questions which came to the table, and I also like the patience of panelists who, across the panels, who took time and effort to answer these questions. So all in all, I believe it has been a very good interaction, and I'm sure moving forward as the Asia Business Responsibility Conclave, you will take efforts to see how you could bring on more issues on the table and foster that sense of collaboration which is so very required in today's age and time.
Thanks. Now it's open to audience. If the audience want to make comments, questions, comments are welcome. But now there is no question, only comments. Yeah, briefly. Yeah, go ahead.
Actually be the catalyst for the change that what we are looking at. So once again, thanks a lot for all the pain you have taken, and the whole people who are involved in the organizing this whole event. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
It was really insightful 3 days workshop for a person like me who has a passion for sustainability. I have attended many conferences, but somehow we find that I am an odd man out in some of the conclave. And here I could see that all the like-minded people are gathered in under the one roof and with a common objective. That is very interesting. Sustainability seems to be a great future with this all insights, and this is a very good move with the ABRC initiative, and wish to see with a long-term objective in the coming years with some kind of common again driven purpose for that. I wish you all the best. Thanks, sir.
I would like to congratulate Dr. Ambambu and your team for making this wonderful event. It's a good beginning, I would say, because these are the platforms where you would be able to hear your what you think as the right, or it may not be always in line with general thinking and all, but definitely when you have people in the sustainability profession at various levels, there are people from the decision making, there are people from NGO side, or even from the industry side. It gives a perspective of everyone's, and you can also rethink what has been talked about and how it has come. So it's a good beginning, and you should continue maybe on a regular basis through a networking or other ways and means, not only as a conference, so that like-minded people can actually hear their ideas and then bring out new things. So we can take it forward from here. Thank you very much.
Sharmila Oswal. Many companies come across and they want to do the sustainability reporting, but there is actually the kind of information is not that available. I think the first time what I think even I have come across this kind of conclave. I mean, though there would be CSR conclaves and all, but this is my first experience in India. So I feel that this should be, regularly doing. I am heading IGBC, India Green Building Council, Pune, and also Griha. So recently we had conference in IGBC and we were talking about so much on sustainability reporting, CSR reporting, but we had hardly anybody who could share this kind of the vision or the need assessment. So that is lacking, absolutely lacking. So I think this kind of efforts would definitely make the purpose served. So I think this is really good. Thank you.
So let me propose vote of thanks. Firstly, to my sponsors, GIZ and TUV Nord, Bombay Stock Exchange, and JSW, and AIA Engineering. Okay, these are our sponsors, and we really thank them. We thank all the exhibitors. Again, Wockhardt Foundation, ITC, you call it ITC IT? Oh, IT Infotech, right? And BVCI, and TUV Nord again, and many more exhibitors, and a number of supporting organizations. Actually, initially we were quite inspired by the support given by Accountability, okay, and Global Reporting Initiative, Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, NEERI, IBG, FIMI, EU India Chambers, Indian Merchant Chambers, and Asian Association of Human Rights, NASSCOM Foundation, Habitat for Humanity, and India Tech Foundation, Energetica, PowerEdge, and Karmayog, IKF and Green Mela, and SIAG and Indian Biomass Power Association. Okay, quite a number of people supported, and they enthusiastically participated in it. More than ABRC here, what we assembled here, okay, and deliberated here, we also saw to that the message went across through variety of people who supported us and their members, a number of associations. And much before this conference was held, we also tried to initiate some level of debate around the various issues that we raised in the conference. In fact, we don't, from next time onwards, ABRC you will definitely see, will not begin discussion. It will be actually coming together to conclude and celebrate. So the discussion happens as a process through the year in variety of media. That is the way that we are looking at it. Anyway, I am proposing vote of thanks. Then the NEETI students who constituted the ABRC research team, they are behind all the audio visuals. They did understand the topics, conducted research around that, got some of the organizing committee, advisory committee of ABRC 2012, their approvals, and they turned quite good quality videos, I suppose. Many people appreciated it. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the students from NEETI. And thanks a lot for all the panelists. In fact, some of them spared so much amount of time that traveled all the way. They are all very busy. Okay, so all of them came forward, okay, and participated and shared their views. And audience, you all guys, 3 days, so you spent with us. It's absolutely great. Then our outreach partner, IDOBRA, and our media partner, CNBC TV 18, and number of volunteers from Winmark Foundation. It's not Winmark Foundation, it's Winmark Services actually, and India Tech Foundation, and staff of General Carbon. And main photograph that you saw in the brochure is Sania there, you all would be knowing. Thanks a lot to her. She was one of the main organizers. And thanks a lot to everybody. If I forgot somebody's name, Sania, did I miss anything? Huh? Oh, thank myself. Okay. Okay. Thanks a lot. With all that, let us close the session. Thanks a lot for your patience and understanding. Thanks.